Okay, week 2 of fly tying the EP baitfish. I guess to begin, again, everything we're going to tie in, except for the last stack up here at the head, is going to be half the original length of the material. So you're going to take your clump of EP and you're going to cut it in half. And that's going to be everything until the last stack where we're actually going to use quarter length. So with that being said, I'm going to start. You can see I've got my hook and thread started. I'm going to tie in our tail, and I'm going to do that by tying our bottom color, our white, in at the halfway mark of the fiber. I'm going to pinch it, and I'm going to get a couple wraps right on top of each other, and then I'm going to wrap forward 1, 2, 3, 4 wraps to create a little base. So I can fold this back on itself and then tie back 1, 2, 3, 4 wraps to make sure that that is not going to come out of there. Now I'm going to advance my thread again in front of that little bump here. I'm going to take our first top color, our chartreuse, and this is how I tie these. Again, there's a bunch of different ways to tie these. I like tying it around the hook shank because, again, it's not going to come out, it's not going to go anywhere. The key here, though, is to place it where you want it and then kind of lean it back a little bit and then tie over it. And what that does is it really captures all that material. We're going to tie back to about where that tail started. Then we're going to move our thread forward. We're going to do our first bottom stack, and this one, instead of coming up from the bottom, we're going to go down from the top. Again, even your tips out and do the exact same process. Make sure to split that hook point with your material so you get even material distribution. And once you tie that in, we're going to advance our thread forward so we can do our next stack. And this fly, again, is just a repeat. You're going to do the same thing over and over and over again. So our second stack of top color is going to come up from the bottom. We're going to capture that, make sure those tips are even. Hold on to that material, lean it back a little bit and start wrapping over it. And you're going to want these little gaps in between your materials here. Otherwise the fly will get too thick. I got a straggler here. So the key here is to space these out so that it doesn't get too thick. If it gets too thick, it's not going to cast well, it's not going to swim as well as it could. So again, leave a little bit of a gap. We're going to advance our thread every time we tie in a material. We're going to advance our thread forward about 2 eye lengths. So that's 2 stacks. You're going to get 4 to 5 stacks of the body material before we do the head. So that's 2. Here's our third one coming up from the bottom. Even those tips. And I'll move this forward just a little bit here. And wrap back on it. And again, that's going to set that kind of 45-degree angle that's going to allow us to trim this fly to shape. All these EP flies, well, not all of them, most of them are tied to be trimmed to shape. So that, don't worry about how crazy it looks right now. Even these tips, pull straight down and wrap over that material backwards. And then I like to tuck it all up out of the way so it doesn't hinder my next one. Wrap forward, about 2 eye lengths. Grab our next material, which is our 4th stack. I'm actually going to go a little bit forward here. Come up from the bottom, pinch, even those tips, and capture and wrap backwards. You get about an eye gap in between these. You know, if I lift these up, you can see that gap in between all of those, which will disappear when it's wet. So again, don't freak out. It's supposed to do that. And do our next bottom color. And wrap back. There we go. Now I'm going to do my last stack before the head and the flash. So I'm going to do my last top one, coming up from the bottom, and our thread's going to be almost at the eye, but again, we're going to create a base for our eyes. Wrap back over that. Got about an eye and a half gap to the actual eye, which is just what I want. I'm going to do my last bottom stack from the top. Tie that in. Raise that up out of the way. Get a good couple wraps on that. Now we're going to tie in our flash, our lateral line. And this isn't necessary. I like how it looks. It also kind of hides your tie-in points right here. Again, not 100% necessary, but I think it looks nice. And we want that going right down the center. So I'm going to lay that there, make sure I like where it is. I'm going to switch hands, pinch it with my left, do kind of a loose wrap, and just like the tail, we're going to wrap forward a little bit. And I'm going to take this tag end here, I'm going to fold it back. I'm going to tie over that. And that, again, just like the tail, it's going to make it so that material will never come out. And I'm going to come in and snip that extra piece. And if you have a rotary vise, this is when you're going to flip it over to tie in the other piece of flash, just so you can make sure it's sitting where you want it. Again, I'm going to line that up with the hook shank. I'm going to pinch it down, get a couple wraps in forward, fold that piece back, tie it back. If it's not exactly where you want it, you can tweak it a little bit. I'm going to come in, cut this butt end, put the fly back in the correct orientation. Now, for our last stack, again, we want everything at a quarter length. So I'm going to take, I pre-cut all of my material in half. This is half length. I'm going to fold that in half again and cut it. And then I'm going to combine those two. I want a little bit thicker piece for my head. It's just going to help keep those shoulders of this fly in the, standing more upright. I'm going to do the same to my bottom color. And let's see, I got a little bit too much of the white here, so I'm going to thin it out. Again, this fly can easily get too bulky. So if you think you have enough, maybe take a few pieces out, because the thinner it is, the more it's going to move. And to do this last stack, we're going to tie in just like we did our tail. I'm going to take this material, I'm going to tie it in at the halfway point, 50-50 on the material, and I'm going to capture it with a nice loose wrap. I'm going to wrap back a little bit, 3-4 turns, nothing crazy. And I'm just, again, leaving a little base, 5 turns, so that I can fold this material back over itself. So again, for the bottom, I'm just going to come up, pinch this material right here, take a nice loose wrap so I don't pull anything around the hook. Once I get it captured, pull straight down. Your material's not going to move on you. Do a couple wraps back. Now I'm going to take this top material. I'm going to push it down with my thumb, and then I'm going to pinch it. Do 1, 2 wraps. And if you have a rotary vise, flip it over to do the bottom one. It's a little easier. But for sake of demonstration, because not everybody has one, I'm going to do it without flipping my vise. But I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Couple wraps. Pull nice and tight, make sure it's not going anywhere, and then pull your thread in front of those stacks and actually tie right on the hook shank, right behind the eye. And at this point, I'm going to whip finish, pull some thread out, and get a 3-4 turn finish in here. Get that little guy out of there. Not super concerned with the whip finish because we are going to glue some eyes on, and that glue is going to help penetrate into the material and the thread, and it's going to help hold everything in place. So again, it looks kind of crazy. We're going to trim it, don't worry. So at this point, I'm going to tilt my vise a little bit. You can also take the vise out, or the fly out of the vise for putting the eyes on. I definitely take it out to trim. I've just got a brush on super glue. This is Loctite. Just gonna put a little brush of glue here. I'm gonna set this eye right over it. Now this is where you want to try not to glue your finger to the fly. But that last stack we did is creating kind of a little base for us to push this eye into it. You're going to have to hold it here for a second. This glue doesn't dry immediately. I'm going to flip my fly over. Again, if you take it out of the vise, you can manipulate the fly however you want, which is definitely handy. Now the hard part here is getting these eyes even. We want these eyes all in the same spot. A little bit more glue on there. Again, sorry if you can't really see this, but I want to make sure it's straight. We're going to set this, kind of just drop it right on there again so we don't glue our fingers. It will happen. And I'm going to take, if you get a little crazy with the glue, you can take a bodkin or a like a half-hitch tool and push down on it just to help keep everything in place. I think that guy's pretty well stuck. This guy's pretty well stuck, and now we're at the point where we need to trim this fly. Now you can create a template. If you buy one of these flies and you like how it looks, or you go online and you find the shape of a bait fish that you like, you know, a pre-trimmed one, you take this, trace it out on a piece of cardboard, and you can create a template so that all your flies are going to look the same. But either, whether you're going to do it freehand or you're going to do it with a template, the key here is to fluff everything out so that it's kind of at its natural resting position. And then also the key is to not trim your lateral lines off. I'm going to move my vise out of the way so that I can come in. I like to trim the bottom first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this by the eyes, and I'm going to find where this this hook point is, and it's right here, and that's my first cut. I'm gonna, again, you can always cut more off, so don't go too crazy. First, I'm just gonna cut straight back. I'm gonna worry about tapering here in a minute. So once I do that, I find where that hook point is. I wanna go just below the hook point. I don't want this material wrapping around the hook point. Also, try not to hit the hook point with your scissors. It's a good way to dull them. And then use your lateral line as kind of a gauge to where this is supposed to taper to. I'm going to come in and I'm just going to cut at an angle all the way back. And then I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to hold this fly, and again, about the same length as the head, or as the bottom. I'm going to come up, I'm going to start, again, I'm going to leave some room here. I want to be able to cut more off if I need to. And I'm just going to slowly take it down, little by little. And now if you look at this, it's kind of square at the top. Most fish aren't square, so take your scissors at a 45 and kind of round that over. It just helps for a little bit more realistic look. Do you have to? No. Will it look better to somebody looking through your fly box? Yes. And then again, hard corners, I'm going to take this shoulder here and I'm just going to lightly round it. And again, these all compress down in the water, so it's gonna get a little more streamlined. So if it looks a little bulky now, don't worry about that. It will tame itself. And then once you get the shape you like, take your lateral flash, and right at about the end of the tail, I like to cut them at an angle. I don't like flat cuts on flash. Get my vise back in here so you guys can see this. And there you go. There's the EP baitfish variant, I guess, because it's not. But this is a great bass, pike, snook if you go down to the salt. I've had jacks eat this. Definitely a lot of snook and pike. You can tie these big, you can tie them small, but that's week 2. We'll see you next week for week 3.